OA. Human Rights Watch sounds the alarm on the abuse of schoolgirls in Senegal. Malawi farmers rush to mine gold amid poor harvests. And the World Health Organization joins with its global partners to commemorate World AIDS Day under the theme Know Your Status. Africa 54 starts right now.
Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight with the widespread abuse of Senegalese girls in secondary schools, including sexual exploitation, according to a recent Human Rights Watch report that documents incidents of gender-based violence and harassment around the country. But as Sophia Christensen reports from Dakar, authorities and teachers are denouncing the report as poorly researched.
When she was in 4th grade, a teacher offered to help Awa, who does not wish to use her real name, with her homework after school. Awa still recalls the day she went to her teacher's house in her native village of Dagan 15 years ago.
He was asking me questions and I was answering him, but after a while, he started putting his hands on my body. I pushed him away and ran home.
For the rest of the school year, Awa lived in fear, as the teacher threatened to fail her for rejecting his advances. In October, Human Rights Watch reported that sexual exploitation of schoolgirls in Senegal is widespread. Most cases of abuse are settled at the community level, but culprits are rarely punished, says community leader Ibrahima Sen.
In our country, going to the police can be difficult. You need to be someone. A nobody like me will struggle.
Human Rights Watch has called on Dakar to ban sexual relations between teachers and students and to start sex education programs in schools. But Senegal's teachers' unions have responded by dismissing the report.
It's a bit disrespectful because with a population of 90,000 teachers focusing on just 3 or 4 regions and about 100 students cannot be representative of Senegal.
Meanwhile, Senegal's education ministry has rejected the idea of introducing sex education.
We are already tackling sexual violence, but we must also consider our religious values and socio-cultural realities. This is why the government is not ready to integrate comprehensive sexual education in schools.
Awa escaped her teacher's harassment 15 years ago by moving to the capital to continue her studies. But she was too ashamed to tell her parents why she suddenly left the village. They found out years later, after the teacher had moved away and could no longer be held accountable. Sophia Christensen for VOA News, Dakar.
Well, thousands of angry and frustrated Zimbabweans gathered Thursday in a nationwide protest over the country's economic collapse and what the opposition calls the new government's cocktail of lies. Some cheer the protesters from kilometers-long lines at the gas stations that still have fuel. Now, President Emmerson Mnangagwa's administration is under growing pressure 1 year after taking off office following the removal of longtime leader Robert Mugabe. Tensions remain high after July's disputed election that Mnangagwa narrowly won. Uganda helped funnel European arms and ammunition to South Sudan at the height of its civil war, circumventing a European Union arms embargo, according to Weapons Monitoring Group. British-based conflict armament research and on Thursday said the South Sudan arranged for the Ugandan government to provide end-user assurances for purchases of weapons and ammunition from Bulgaria, Romania and Slovakia. The weaponry delivered to Uganda in 2014 and 2015 was then transferred to neighboring South Sudan, the group said in a report based on 4 years of research. The report documented how senior South Sudanese military officials were involved in this process from beginning to end. More than 1/3 of South Sudan's 12 million people have been uprooted by the conflict, which erupted 2 years after South Sudan gained independence in 2011. Officials from both Uganda and South Sudan declined to comment on this report. Now, farmers in Malawi are rushing to small-scale gold mining to make up for lost income from poor harvests. Villagers are digging up and shifting soil in the search of the precious metal to sell to buyers in neighboring countries. But authorities are cracking down on the unlicensed mining. Lamik Masina has more from Lilongwe.
Residents of Natenje, Central Malawi, started panning for gold in July after authorities evicted unlicensed foreign miners. But neither are these locals. Many of them farmers are authorized to mine. Drought and pest produced poor crops, so many farmers like Eunice Stafford tend to gold mining.
I have children who go to school. I can't manage on my own to take care of them, so I work hard to make sure that the little I get from gold mining I can use to buy them notebooks and soap.
Villagers lease small plots of land to dig up and sell the earth thought to have gold, along with what nuggets they find to middlemen. Some of the buyers come from neighboring Mozambique, Tanzania and Zambia.
Sometimes I go home with $14 a day, sometimes $7 or even $3. But $3 is a lot of money to me, considering the economic problems we've been facing.
Unlicensed gold mining, say locals, has made some Malawian farmers comparatively well off.
For example, in my village, there were only 4 houses roofed with corrugated iron sheets, but now there are 10 houses, and 2 people have so far bought motorbikes.
But Malawian authorities are beginning to crack down on illegal mining. Mining Ministry spokesman Sangwani Piri says the farmers are using dangerous methods.
They dig into the soil, leaving a big chunk of soil above them, thereby making it to be more fragile, and at the end of the day falls upon them. We have already lost about 3 women who had been doing that or digging thereunder.
Malawi police and the military have been evicting villagers from unlicensed mines, raising tensions between authorities and farmers who have few other options for income. Lamek Masina for VOA News, Lilongwe.
While leaders are preparing for a potentially fiery G20 summit starting Friday in Buenos Aires, as annual ritual tells us, the 2-day meeting is being held against the backdrop of a spiraling trade war that has set the global economy on edge, plus a series of dangerous security flashpoints from Ukraine to the Middle East to the South China Sea, rather.
The scene is set for a fractious summit as the leaders of the world's 2 biggest economies come together in the midst of a trade war. US President Donald Trump has threatened to raise tariffs from 10% to 25% on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. He has warned of more tariffs if no agreement is reached with Beijing on issues like trade imbalances and intellectual property. The White House believes it holds the momentum for a possible deal.
Most observers believe China to be in a slump, whereas the United States is in a very strong, solid position going into this summit.
China has warned of grave consequences if the trade war intensifies.
In the last century, we had 2 world wars, and in between them, Great Depression. I don't think anybody should really try to have a repetition of history.
The first G20 Leaders Summit was held following the 2008 global financial crisis.
Now, a decade on, the greatest threat to established economic order is actually surprisingly coming from, in many ways, the chief defender of that order, with the protectionist trade wars kicked off by President Trump and the America First foreign policy.
Geopolitical tensions are simmering. The meeting comes days after Russia rammed Ukrainian vessels off Crimea and seized several of its naval personnel. Kiev says the incident happened in international waters. In response, US President Donald Trump raised doubts about a planned meeting at the summit with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Speaking Wednesday, Putin blamed Ukraine.
What was the Russian Border Control Force supposed to do? Military ships have illegally entered into the territorial waters of Russian Federation.
Also attending the summit, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, implicated in ordering the killing last month of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul, and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. It is vital the summit is seen to make progress on key global challenges, says Naylor.
Well, how ought the economic system operate? Is protectionism a good thing or a bad thing? Is climate change real or not? If these countries can't agree, it sends a very, very strong signal to everybody not at the table that maybe they don't need to sign up.
Thousands of anti-globalization protesters are already gathering in Buenos Aires. 22,000 police officers are being deployed in the capital, while some of the fiercest battles could take place inside the summit itself. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Here in Washington, the U.S. Senate has advanced a resolution to stop American help to the Saudi-led military campaign in Yemen. VOA's Michael Bowman reports Wednesday's vote came despite pleas from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, who met with the full Senate behind closed doors.
The yeas are 63, the nays are 37. The motion is agreed to.
A loud rebuke of Saudi Arabia on Capitol Hill nearly 2 months after dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed at the Saudi consulate in Turkey.
Our response to this murder and the Saudi regime's ruthless suppression of dissent will serve as a lesson to other nations who would do the same.
The Senate vote brings the resolution from committee to the Senate floor for further action.
With 14 million people on the verge of starvation in Yemen and things getting worse by the day, there's no time to lose.
Hours earlier, top members of President Donald Trump's national security team briefed senators, arguing a cutoff of U.S. support for Saudi Arabia could scuttle hopes for Yemeni peace talks.
Something that we have diplomatically been strengthened, and we think we're right on the cut. So this administration, Secretary Mattis and myself, that passing a resolution at this point undermines that. It would encourage the Houthis, it would encourage the Iranians.
The argument majority of senators.
With the restoration of authorization for the use of military force by Congress.
Also on senators' minds, the exclusion of CIA Director Gina Haspel from the classified briefing. The CIA is widely reported to have concluded that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the slaying of Khashoggi, a U.S. resident.
It's outrageous that the Senate can be stonewalled from hearing from the CIA director. It tells me volumes about what really is going on here.
The White House insists no firm conclusions have been reached on who ordered Khashoggi killed.
We have no smoking gun that the Crown Prince was involved, not the intelligence community or anyone else. There is no smoking gun.
I think it's time for us to send a clear and strong signal to our close ally, Saudi Arabia, that actions that violate our core values, like participating in the murder of a U.S. resident journalist, have consequences.
Analysts note that one resolution advancing in one house of Congress does not constitute a rupture of U.S.-Saudi relations.
We do help protect their security, and they help provide the world's oil needs. That basic relationship, that basic alliance, if you will, is not going to be shaken by this.
But attitudes towards Saudi Arabia have shifted on Capitol Hill. Nearly 20 senators who helped defeat a similar resolution on Yemen long before Khashoggi's death have now joined backers of the measure to advance it. Michael Bowman, VOA News, the Capitol.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, new programs to help you determine your HIV status. But first, a look at Thursday's headlines.
This administration, under my leadership, is very conscious of the condition you are in.
zegny zany. Vato fotsy sy vato maty.
Essa unidade sanitária foi introduzida.
Keep hope, because if you can do something, you will have to retry it and retry it till you get to it.
Well, and it's time for Health Reporter, and joining us now is Africa 54 Health correspondent Lino Madu with information on World AIDS Day. Lino.
Well, Saturday, December 1st marks World AIDS Day. The theme for the 30th anniversary, rather, of the worldwide commemoration is Know Your Status. Experts say HIV testing is important to help expand treatment and ensure that all people with HIV are able to lead a healthy and productive life. The idea is to empower people to protect themselves and their loved one. According to the joint United Nations program on HIV/AIDS, there has been a significant progress in HIV/AIDS response since 1988. 3 in 4 people with HIV know their status. However, it is still a long way to go, as the need is to reach all those people who are living with HIV and don't know their status. Meanwhile, UNICEF revealed in a report released Thursday that about 360,000 adolescents are projected to die of AIDS-related diseases between 2018 and 2030 without additional investment in HIV prevention, testing, and treatment programs. The report, Children, HIV, and AIDS: The World in 2030, notes that based on population projections and current trends, the number of 0 to 19-year-olds newly infected with HIV will reach an estimated 270,000 in 2030, decreasing by 1/3 over current estimates. However, UNICEF says this downward trajectory is too slow, particularly among adolescents. According to the report, by 2030, the number of new HIV infections among children in the first decade of life will be cut in half, while new infections among adolescents aged 10 to 19 years old will only decrease by 29%. Now, joining us in the studio for more is Chip Lyons, President and CEO of the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, EGPAF. Chip Lyons, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
Also joining us from our studio in the United Nations headquarters in New York is Dr. Chewe Luo, Associate Director, HIV/AIDS Program, UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. Dr. Luo, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you very much.
So let me start with you, Dr. Luo. With this report, we see a combination of good news and not so good news. Where do we start, Dr. Luo? What is the main takeaway?
Well, the main takeaway is that, first of all, the population of children and adolescents is growing globally. We estimate that there will be a 5% increase in the population of children and adolescents by 2030. But when we look at that increase, we also know that there are regions that are going to be impacted more. And of concern is Eastern and Southern Africa, but also Western and Central Africa, and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Now, when you look at the responses to date for HIV, yes, we have reason to celebrate, because when you look at what we've done in reducing new infections in children 0 to 10, we have all the reason to pat ourselves on the back, because a lot of women today who are living with HIV, 93% of them have access to antiretroviral drugs that, first of all, can improve their health and keep them alive and well, but also reduce remarkably mother-to-child transmission of HIV. So we're seeing enormous strides in reducing infections in the younger population. But we're not seeing the same for adolescents. And the factors are many, including the fact that they have very poor access to services. HIV testing in this population is extremely low. But then when you look at access to antiretroviral drugs, we also don't have good programs for them to access. And even when they're in care, they're dropping out of care.
So there are several challenges there, Dr. Luo. Chief Lyons, let me have you come in. She talked about this report, good news, bad news. EGPAF has been working with children and adolescents for 30 years now. How does this translate in the work you do today when you look at where we are? How do you assess the situation in light of this report?
First of all, thanks for the focus on kids and AIDS ahead of World AIDS Day this year. I want to strongly endorse the report from UNICEF. Very important, relevant messages there. Let's remember that the world has agreed to the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, one of which is around health, and one of which is to end HIV and AIDS as a public health crisis. What UNICEF, what Dr. Luo are telling us is we're not on track to do that. So if we're serious about that, and we better be serious about trying to achieve that, there are a number of steps that we need to take as a community. UNICEF can't do it alone. EGPAF can't do it alone. Ministries of health, communities, nurses, moms, others in the community. The message is we're not on pace. Okay. That's correct. The message is that youth are disproportionately. That's correct. So what are we going to do about that?
Yes.
It's important. Just last night, the United States Senate voted to reauthorize PEPFAR. PEPFAR has been transformative on the continent over the last 15 years. It's a really important signal. Republicans and Democrats, that's not usually how most sentences in Washington start out. Republicans and Democrats together have reauthorized PEPFAR for the next 5 years. The next step is the appropriations, commensurate with what the challenges are that Dr. Luo talks about, and let's, in this conversation, talk a little bit more about the youth, because there are very particular things that we should be doing there.
And so, Dr. Luo, as we talk about the youth, and you mentioned some of the challenges then, how do we move forward? What is UNICEF's recommending to all the people that are involved?
Well, first of all, I think youth are a powerful force, and we recognize that. But I think what we've done as a community is that we haven't engaged them enough to help us think about what they need, how we design programs that are relevant to them. Youth are very connected as a population. We haven't tapped into the digital space to make sure that we're speaking to them and we're responding in a way that is. And third, I think as we deliver services to them, we also need to understand that the youth today are not about coming to clinics and sitting in long queues. And so how do we innovate around service delivery models that would be attractive to them? And I think those are the things we need to do. And as a community, we've learned a lot over time. It's a question of putting our heads together and saying, how do we do it with young people to make it relevant and impactful?
So, Chief Lyons, and we're running out of time, but very quickly, moving forward, how do we see the next 10 years in terms of priority?
Let's look at what's happened in the last number of years. In country after country, where there's national political leadership, where there are conducive policies, where there is a commitment to reaching everyone, including the more vulnerable populations. Look at countries, South Africa, Botswana, Rwanda, Namibia, and others. Let's not overly complicate this. We have better tools than we've ever had. We've got better medicines than we've ever had. We've got better diagnostics than we've ever had. We need policies and leadership that come together that are conducive to ending AIDS in children, ending AIDS in young people. Again, Dr. Luo is spot on about youth. Kids in Washington, D.C. don't sit in lines forever at clinics.
Yes.
We've got to adapt ourselves, our services, our thinking, and we need them to help design and lead us towards ending AIDS for young people.
And very quickly, Dr. Luo, as we wrap, what is the message from UNICEF beyond that getting tested, very quickly?
Well, I think for me, when we look at young people and we look at HIV, it's also time for us to think about taking HIV out of isolation. When you look at the vulnerabilities and the determinants that make it impossible for us to reach the most vulnerable youth, these determinants are not specific to HIV. And so the dialogue we need to have with ministries of health, ministries of social welfare, communities, has to go beyond HIV. And I think that's the future if we're going to impact HIV and end AIDS by 2030.
Indeed, Dr. Luo, thank you so much for joining us from New York. And Chip Lyons, thank you for joining us as well in the studio. And that Dr. Luo from our studio in New York, and Chip Lyons with EGPATH. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Vincent, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, Lenore. I'll be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending.
Par un chef d'État ayant arraché le pouvoir par coup d'État. Il s'appelait Mobutu.
Well, he may be performing about the years and of the former Congolese dictator Mobutu Sese Seko, but slam artist Yakima believes his poetry has an important message for his country today, not to idolize men in power. Rated as one of the top slam artists in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Yakima has managed to build a sizable following, mainly thanks to social media. Poetry slams, competitive events where performances rated by the audience developed in Chicago in the mid-1980s. They have since spread globally, with slams taking place in Ivory Coast, Madagascar, Singapore, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. Now, for more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings today, Break Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night. Mike.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Some American English expressions sound like they could hurt.
Hit the spot.
Let's see if Anna and Jonathan can help us out.
Have you been to the new restaurant down the street?
I haven't. Is the food any good?
It's delicious. I ate lunch there yesterday, and I had a hamburger that really hit the spot.
A hamburger is exactly what I need.